So we're still in prereq 6. Yeah, I know it's a long section. There's a lot of different factoring techniques to go over. I gotta make sure you go over them all. Uh, but now we're on slide and divide, and I'm going to show you how to factor some of these a little easier than using just trial and error and factoring by grouping. So we do the same process as before. We do the very same process as before. Okay, so I just want you to keep that in mind. We slide that over. 6 times a negative 35. Get negative 210. So I rewrite this as x squared minus x, and then our new large number, which is negative 210. So we are looking for numbers that multiply to give you negative 210 that also add to give you a negative 1. Now I know off the top of your head that does not sound very simple, right? What multiplies to give you negative 210 that also adds to give you a negative 1? Happens to be negative 15 and a positive 14 in this case. Okay? Some cases it's not as easy, like this one, to see what it is. Okay, in other cases it is, but just keep in mind we slide it over. So I slide the 6, that's why it's called slide and divide. I slide the 6. So these are my new factors. Remember when we first started factoring? You just take the x and then we put the two numbers behind it, all minus 15 and a positive 14. And we sit there and try to solve it. Well, with those, there is only a 1. Now we had a number out in front, and that was a 6. So what that means is I need to slide by 6, which we did. That's the multiplying. Now I need to divide each of these by a 6 to help me figure out what my factors are. So I actually have x minus 15 over 6 and x plus 14 over 6. So simplify this. So to simplify this, I realize I can divide the top and the bottom by a 3. Over here, I realize I can divide the top and the bottom by a 2. So I actually end up with x minus 5 over 2 and x plus 7 over 3. Well, those aren't factors. Factors do not have fractions in them. So I need to make these not be fractions anymore, which is actually much simpler than it sounds. All you need to do is take whatever's in the bottom, which is a 2, and move it right out in front of the x. In this one, the bottom is a 3. So I move that right out in front of the x to get my two factors, which are 2x minus 5 and 3x plus 7. There's no grouping involved. There's no making sure the last two terms are the same and factoring out the items. It's very simply put. You just slide the 6 over, and then we divide it by the 6 and simplify. So to find your answers, you set each of those equal to 0 and solve. So I'd add 5 to both sides and subtract 7 to both sides. And I'm finishing the problems up here. So I end up with 2x equals 5, so I divide both sides by 2. And I get x equals 5 halves. I would divide both sides over here by 3. And I get x equals negative 7 thirds. So x equals 5 halves and x equals negative 7 thirds are my two answers here. Okay. So Bob Barker uses it, and if he uses slide and divide, then you should as well. He told me when I saw him last. This is a little easier to do slide and divide on because the numbers aren't as big. The other one we had negative 210. Well, how the heck can you figure that out? This one, much simpler. Slide that 2 over. So when you do, 2 times negative 15 is negative 30. So I have an x squared out in front, a positive x, and now a negative 30. So what two numbers multiply to give you negative 30 that also add to give you an x? Well, what multiplies to give you negative 30 that adds to give you 1? Well, what comes to mind for me? A positive 6 and a negative 5. So when we separate these, right, there's my x's out in front. I put my minus 5 and my positive 6 right in there. But because I slide by 2, now I need to divide by 2. So I got to divide each of those numbers by 2. That's what I'm doing right there. And now I need to simplify. Well, this one can't simplify, but this one can, right? What's 6 divided by 2? That's 3. So I have x minus 5 over 2 and x plus 3. But I told you your factors can have fractions in them, so I take that 2 and I just bump it right out there and put it in front of the x. So there are my two factors. So to solve this problem, I separate each and set them equal to 0. I'd add 5 to both sides for this one. I'd subtract 3 on both sides for this one. So I get 2x equals 5 and x equals negative 3. Well, this one's done. X equals negative 3 is your answer. Got to keep going on this one, though. Divide both sides by 2, so I end up with x equals 5 over 2 and x equals negative 3 as my answers. He actually does have a new show coming out, surprisingly enough. I hope it lasts longer than a week, which is what his late night show lasted. Alright, with this one, sliding and dividing, let's slide that 4 over. So 4 times negative 24 gives us a negative 96. Okay. So I get x squared minus 29x minus 96 equals 0. So what multiplies to give you negative 96? That adds to give you negative 29. So that's what we're looking for. And the answer happens to be negative 32 and positive 3, right? Because negative 32 times 3 is negative 96. Negative 32 plus 3 is negative 29. So when I fill those in, I put a negative 32 in here and a positive 3 in here. And because I slid or I slide by 4, I'm now going to divide each of these by a 4. 32 divided by 4 is 8. That's simple, right? And over here, I have 3 over 4, which I cannot simplify. But I can't have 3 over 4 because it's a fraction. So to get rid of a fraction with factors, I take that 4 and I move it right out in front of the x. So I actually get x minus 8 and 4x plus 3 as my factors. So I set each of those up to solve. I add 8 to both sides. Over in this one, I would first subtract 3 onto both sides. So I end up with x equals 8 because there's nothing else to do, right? Over here, I have 4x equals negative 3. So I divide both sides by the 4, and I get x equals negative 3/4 and x equals 8 as my answers. And let's see here, how are we on time? Alrighty, when we come back here, we will try to finish up, hopefully, this whole section on factoring.